This channel is for women who are doing fine, but feel quietly lost. The kind of delusion that keeps us alive. I want to begin with something that might make you uncomfortable. One day I will not wake up. That is not dramatic. It is not pessimistic. It is simply true. My heart will stop on an ordinary day. The world will continue. The dishwasher may still be mid-cycle. Someone will still be waiting on an email reply from me. And yet, despite knowing this with full intellectual clarity, I set my alarm for tomorrow morning. I refill prescriptions for 3 months at a time. I schedule dental cleanings 6 months out. I contribute to my retirement account as if I have decades left. I plan vacations. I book flights. I buy fresh groceries like I'm guaranteed to eat them. Every night I close my eyes with the quiet assumption that I will open them again. Is that not a form of delusion? I don't lie awake whispering, "What if this is my last night?" I assume continuity. I assume time. But I assume there will be another Tuesday, another grocery run, another ordinary argument about nothing. And if I'm honest, that assumption is the only reason I keep participating in this life. If I truly believed tomorrow was uncertain in a visceral way, would I still fold laundry at 9:45 p.m.? Would I still care about the quarterly review? Would I still compare mortgage rates or research the best walking shoes for plantar fasciitis? Probably not. And so when someone tells me that manifesting a dream life is delusional, I pause, because I am already living inside a belief system that requires faith. I have faith in tomorrow. I have faith that my body will continue cooperating with me. I have faith that my plans matter. I have faith that the effort I put in today will connect to something in the future. And yet when it comes to believing I could live differently, softer, braver, more aligned, suddenly that faith feels irresponsible. That is the part that unsettles me. I am not in crisis. My life, from the outside, is stable. I pay my bills on time. I show up to work. I return calls. I keep the refrigerator stocked. I am not spiraling. I am not collapsing. I am functioning. But somewhere beneath that functionality is a quiet, unnameable ache. It is not depression. It is not despair. It is something more subtle. It is the sense that I am living correctly, but not fully. I am doing fine, and I feel quietly lost. And this is the middle. The middle is not dramatic enough to alarm anyone, does not earn sympathy. It does not disrupt Thanksgiving dinner. It does not demand intervention. The middle is composed. The middle is competent. The middle pays taxes. And yet the middle sometimes feels like floating in place, not drowning, not arriving. When I first heard people talk about manifesting their dream life, I almost rolled my eyes. It sounded like glitter over reality. It sounded like denial. I like pretending. But the more I examined my own life, the more I realized I was already pretending, just in a different direction. I pretend that staying the same is safer than changing. I pretend that stability equals fulfillment. I pretend that because I am not miserable, I must not be allowed to want more. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from holding everything together for decades. I have been strong so long that strength feels like my only option. I am the reliable one. I'm the one who absorbs, manages, anticipates. But strength can become a costume. And sometimes, at night, when the house is finally quiet and the notifications stop, I wonder, what would happen if I allowed myself to imagine a different version of my life? Not a fantasy, not a yacht in the Mediterranean, not some inflated reinvention, just a quieter, truer version. If I already believe I will wake up tomorrow, Why is it so outrageous to believe tomorrow could look different? And why is believing in routine considered practical, but believing in change considered naive? Maybe manifesting is not about magical thinking. Maybe it is about choosing where I direct my already existing faith, because I am already believing in something unseen, the future. The question is not whether I believe. The question is what I am believing in. Am I believing that things will continue exactly as they are? Predictable, tolerable, slightly unsatisfying? Or am I willing to believe that the middle is not the final chapter? There is something almost shocking about admitting that I want more, not more money necessarily, not more status, just more aliveness, more congruence between who I am on paper and who I feel I could be. For women like me, stable, independent, accomplished, desire can feel indulgent. We were raised to be grateful, responsible, reasonable. We learned to minimize our longing so we wouldn't seem ungrateful. But longing does not disappear just because I suppress it. It waits. Sometimes it shows up as irritability, sometimes as boredom, sometimes as scrolling too long at night, searching for something I cannot name. And maybe what I am searching for is permission to believe that my life is not done expanding. If I am honest, the idea that I could redesign parts of my life feels both thrilling and terrifying. Because belief changes responsibility. Once I admit I want something different, and I can no longer hide behind inevitability, believing is the first disruption. It cracks open the narrative that says, this is just how it is. And that crack is powerful. I am not promising you miracles. I am not promising overnight reinvention. I am not asking you to burn sage or write affirmations on your bathroom mirror, if that feels ridiculous. I am asking something much quieter. What if the same quiet faith that carries you to tomorrow could also carry you towards something more aligned? What if you are not foolish for imagining a better life? What if the real delusion is believing that the version of you that exists today is the final version? If this resonates, if something in you tightened when I said that, stay with me. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. Not because I have all the answers, but because I am committed to exploring this middle honestly. Your support gives this space room to grow, and it allows me to keep creating conversations that feel real, not rehearsed. We are not here for hype. We are here for clarity, because you are not broken. You are just standing in the middle of something that hasn't fully unfolded yet. And I think it is time we talk about what comes next. The fear of getting everything. For a long time, I told myself I was afraid of failing. It sounded noble, humble, understandable. But if I strip away the polite explanation, what unsettles me more is the possibility of actually getting everything I say I want. Because getting everything rearranges a life. When I imagine leaving the career that has paid my mortgage for 20 years, I don't just picture freedom. I picture explaining myself. I picture the silence at a dinner party when someone asks what I do, and I no longer have the polished, socially acceptable answer. I picture the loss of structure, the loss of being needed in the way I have always been needed. Success, in its quietest form, can threaten identity. If I truly stepped into the version of my life that feels more aligned, I would have to let parts of myself dissolve. The competent executive, the woman who never wavers, the one who knows exactly what she's doing. There is comfort in being known for something stable, even if that stability is slowly suffocating. And then there is love. I say I want a partner who feels steady, someone who doesn't disturb my nervous system, someone who sits beside me in silence without needing to fill it. But if that person actually arrived, I would have to lower the walls that made me efficient at surviving alone. Independence has been my armor. It has protected me. It has given me pride. It has allowed me to navigate the world without waiting for anyone's permission. But armor is heavy. If I truly received the kind of intimacy I claim to want, I would have to admit that I don't want to carry everything by myself anymore. And that admission feels vulnerable in a way I am not entirely practiced in. Sometimes I suspect that what I call discernment is actually avoidance. I tell myself I have high standards, and maybe I do. But I also know that standards can become shields. There is a strange safety in longing for something that never fully materializes. As long as it remains out of reach, I am not required to change. Expansion is destabilizing. When I imagine moving somewhere new, perhaps Charleston, South Carolina, where the air feels softer and the pace is different, I don't just see morning walks and a smaller, more intentional life. I see uncertainty. I see starting over socially at an age when most people have already cemented their circles. I see the possibility of loneliness before connection forms. Familiar dissatisfaction has a rhythm. I know how to operate inside it. I know its disappointments. I know its boundaries. Unknown fulfillment has no map. And for a nervous system that has spent decades holding steady, unpredictability can feel like danger, even when it is beautiful. I have built a life that works. That word, works, carries weight. It functions. It supports me. It protects me. But does it move me? Sometimes I think about the women I admire quietly, not the ones with massive platforms or dramatic reinventions, the ones who recalibrate at 50 without announcing it, the ones who downsize, who change industries, who fall in love again without spectacle. Their lives do not explode outward. They shift inward. That kind of expansion requires something I am still learning: capacity. Capacity to hold more joy without bracing for loss. Capacity to hold more visibility without shrinking. Capacity to succeed without apologizing. There is also a subtler fear that lives beneath all of this. If I finally get what I want, and it still doesn't make me feel whole, then what? As long as the dream remains slightly out of reach, it carries hope. It carries potential. It can be blamed for the gap I feel inside. But if I attain it, the aligned career, the peaceful relationship, the move to a place that feels right, and I am still confronted with myself, then I lose the illusion that external change is the entire answer. That realization is sobering. Manifesting in its mature form is not about acquiring more. It is about becoming capable of sustaining more responsibility, more intimacy, more freedom. And freedom for a woman who has been reliable for decades can feel disorienting. When my calendar is full, I know who I am. When my obligations define my days, I feel anchored. If I create space, real space, I might have to face questions I have postponed. What do I actually want to do with my time? Who am I when no one needs me to perform strength? These questions are not glamorous. They are destabilizing. So sometimes I delay the very life I say I want because it would require me to evolve beyond the version of myself that feels familiar. It is easier to fantasize than to expand. But there is a difference between comfort and alignment. Comfort soothes the present. Alignment stretches it. And I am beginning to understand that the fear of getting everything is not weakness. It is a signal. It tells me that the life I imagine would demand growth I have not yet fully practiced. The question is not whether I deserve it. The question is whether I am willing to become the woman who can hold it without shrinking back to what feels safe. That is the edge I am standing on now, not afraid of failing, afraid of becoming larger than the life I have carefully maintained. Letting go is not dramatic. It's private. Letting go has never looked the way I imagined it would. There is no dramatic music, no final speech, no moment where I stand in the rain and declare that I deserve better. Most of the time, letting go is invisible. It is me sitting at my kitchen counter at 10:17 p.m., rereading a message I almost sent to someone who once mattered deeply. My thumb hovers, my chest tightens. I already know the conversation would reopen something that has taken months to quiet down, and then I do something that feels both small and monumental. I delete the draft. No one sees that decision. There is no applause for restraint. But that is what letting go looks like now. It is private. There are attachments that linger long after logic has moved on. An old relationship that ended without explosion, just erosion. A job title that still impresses people even though it no longer impresses me. A version of myself from 10 years ago who felt more certain, more defined, more praised. I do not cling because I am weak. I cling because these things helped me survive. They were scaffolding during seasons when I needed structure. Releasing them feels like dismantling something that once protected me. A few months ago, I drove alone to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I told people it was just a weekend away. I didn't explain that I needed distance from my own noise. The desert has a way of stripping things down. The air is dry, the sky impossibly open, the colors muted and honest. When I walked past adobe buildings and art galleries, past tourists holding maps, past couples who looked unhurried, I remember standing still in a narrow street as the sun lowered, feeling the quiet settle around me. And I realized something uncomfortable. I had been carrying identities that no longer fit, simply because I didn't know who I would be without them. Letting go is not only about people, it is about roles. I have been the dependable one, the financially responsible one. I'm the one who absorbs tension and smooths it over. Those roles became automatic. They gave me value. They gave me praise. They made me necessary. But necessity can become a cage. When I imagine stepping away from certain responsibilities, I don't just feel relief. I feel guilt. I feel disorientation. If I am not the one holding everything together, who am I? Attachment lives in the nervous system. My body recognizes familiar dynamics even when they exhaust me. That is why letting go feels physical. It is not only an intellectual decision, it is a recalibration of what my system has grown used to. There is grief in that recalibration. Grief for the version of love that almost worked. Grief for the career trajectory I once believed would define me. Grief for the younger version of myself who thought certainty would last forever. No one prepares us for the quiet mourning of identities. When something ends loudly, people rally around you. When something ends slowly, privately, you are often alone with it. In Santa Fe, I wrote a letter in a small notebook I had tucked into my bag. I did not write to a person. I wrote to a version of myself who believed that endurance was the same thing as fulfillment. I thanked her. She had done her job. She had built stability. She had created safety. But I told her gently that I could not let her run my life anymore. I did not tear the page out. I did not burn it. I simply closed the notebook and carried it with me as I walked back to my hotel. Letting go, I am learning, is not about rejecting the past. It is about releasing the grip it has on my future. There are habits I am still loosening. The reflex to check someone's social media. The reflex to overwork when I feel uncertain. The reflex to say yes when my body is quietly saying no. Each release is subtle. Each one is a decision made in solitude. There is also the matter of friendships that no longer align. This has been harder than I expected, not because there is conflict, but because there isn't. We simply outgrew each other. The conversations loop. The humor no longer lands. The energy feels slightly off. Ending those connections does not involve confrontation. It involves space, fewer calls, longer gaps, a quiet acknowledgement that we are walking in different directions. That kind of ending requires maturity, and it requires accepting that not every relationship is meant to stretch across decades. Sometimes I wonder if I stay attached because I fear emptiness, if I release the old relationship, the old job identity, the old version of myself. What fills the space? But space is not the enemy. Space is possibility. The problem is that possibility is uncomfortable. It has no defined edges. It does not come with guarantees. Still, I am beginning to understand that holding on to what no longer fits is its own form of stagnation. Letting go is not dramatic because growth at this stage of life is rarely dramatic. It is measured, thoughtful, intentional. It happens in kitchens at night, on solo trips, no one questions. In journal entries, no one reads. It happens when I choose not to re-enter a story that has already ended. It happens when I stop introducing myself by roles that no longer feel alive. It is not glamorous work, and it does not produce immediate reward. But every time I loosen my grip on something that has expired, I feel a subtle shift, not loss, lightness, gratitude that isn't performative. For a long time, gratitude felt performative to me. It looked like curated captions under filtered photos. It sounded like polished morning routines that began at 5 a.m. with green juice and declarations of abundance. I associated gratitude with people who seemed relentlessly upbeat, and as if acknowledging struggle might cancel out the blessing. So I resisted it. Not because I was ungrateful, but because I didn't want to participate in something that felt like denial, dressed as positivity. But something shifted when I stopped thinking of gratitude as a public act and started practicing it in private. Not the kind where I force myself to list grand achievements. Not the kind where I pretend everything is perfect. The quieter kind. The kind that notices what is still intact. And there is a difference between being impressed by my life and being quietly thankful for it. I am not impressed every day. Some days feel repetitive, predictable, heavy in small ways. But even on those days, there are things holding me up. Hot water running over my shoulders in the morning. The steady hum of my refrigerator. The fact that my car starts when I turn the key. The ability to walk up a flight of stairs without pain. These are not glamorous gratitudes. No one would double tap them. But they are real. As I've moved deeper into this middle season of life, I've become more aware of fragility. Not in a dramatic way, just in a grounded way. I have watched friends navigate diagnoses. I've watched marriages unravel quietly. I've watched parents age faster than I expected. Health is no longer an assumption. Stability is no longer invisible. Gratitude, for me now, is less about celebrating what is extraordinary and more about recognizing what has not fallen apart. There is something stabilizing about that. When I scroll through social media and see reinventions, new homes, milestone celebrations, it is easy to feel behind. Even at this age, comparison has a pulse. It whispers that I should be further along, more transformed, more visibly fulfilled. But gratitude interrupts that whisper, not by denying ambition, not by minimizing desire, but by reminding me that my foundation is solid. I have a safe place to sleep. I have financial autonomy. And I have friendships that feel grounded, even if they are fewer than they once were. I have the ability to choose what I do with my evenings. Those things are not small. There is research that says the brain has a negativity bias. It scans for threat. It remembers criticism more vividly than praise. That bias once kept humans alive. It still keeps me alert, but it also makes it easy to overlook stability. So I practice what I think of as micro-gratitude. I'm noticing the warmth of clean sheets against my skin, the quiet satisfaction of a dishwasher running while I sit down with a book, the calm of a 20-minute drive without traffic, just music and my own thoughts. These moments recalibrate something in me. They remind my nervous system that not everything is urgent, not everything is lacking, not everything needs to be optimized. In midlife, I have learned that peace is not boring. It is earned, and gratitude is one of the ways I protect that peace. There are nights when I still feel unsettled, when the quiet ache of wanting something more surfaces. On those nights, gratitude does not erase the ache. It contextualizes it. I can want a different career structure and still be thankful for the income that built my independence. I can want a deeper partnership and still appreciate the strength I cultivated alone. I can imagine relocating someday and still respect the home that has sheltered me for years. And gratitude does not require me to shrink my desires. It asks me to hold complexity. I can acknowledge what is missing without dismissing what is present. That balance is maturity. When I traveled to Santa Fe, New Mexico, I remember standing outside just before dusk, feeling the dry air on my face. I felt both restless and grounded at the same time. That paradox used to confuse me. Now I understand it better. Gratitude anchors me. Desire moves me. Without gratitude, desire can become desperation. Without desire, gratitude can become complacency. I do not want either extreme. So at night, before I sleep, I mentally name a few things that carried me through the day. Sometimes they are simple: a productive meeting, a text from a friend, a body that cooperated at the gym. Sometimes they are intangible: patience in a tense conversation, restraint when I wanted to react, clarity in a moment that used to confuse me. This practice is not about becoming a different person overnight. Oh, it is about adjusting the lens through which I see my life. When I train my attention to notice what is working, I begin to feel less like I am lacking and more like I am building from solid ground. And that shift matters, because the life I want to create next cannot be built from chronic dissatisfaction. It has to be built from steadiness. Gratitude, in its quietest form, is steadiness. It is me acknowledging that while I may be in the middle, I am not empty-handed. I'm standing on something strong. Get specific or stay stuck. For years, I said I wanted more love, more freedom, more fulfillment. It sounded honest. It sounded reasonable. It was also completely useless, because more has no shape. When I said I wanted love, what did that actually mean? Did I want chemistry, stability, marriage, companionship, intellectual partnership, physical affection, a man who travels with me, a man who stays home? Without specificity, desire stays abstract. And an abstract desire is safe. It allows me to feel like I am reaching without ever having to risk landing somewhere real. Vagueness protects me from disappointment. If I say I want a better career, I never have to define what better costs. Does it mean less money, less status, a smaller title but more autonomy, a consulting practice with irregular income, teaching, writing? Once I get specific, trade-offs appear, and trade-offs require courage, and specificity forces me to confront what I actually value. I remember sitting at my dining table one evening with a legal pad in front of me, not to journal vaguely, not to vent, but to answer a direct question. What do I actually want my life to look like 5 years from now? Not in motivational language, in logistics. Where do I live? Is it the same house, a smaller one? Is it still in this city? Or have I moved somewhere slower, maybe even Charleston, South Carolina, to where mornings feel less rushed and the air carries salt? What time do I wake up? What does my calendar look like? How many hours a week do I work? Do I still attend corporate meetings? Or am I advising independently, choosing clients instead of being assigned to them? Who am I spending Sunday afternoons with? When I forced myself to write details instead of adjectives, something shifted. I could no longer hide behind generic ambition. I realized that what I want is not extravagance, and it is structure that feels intentional. I want work that challenges me without consuming me. I want a partner who feels emotionally regulated, someone who reads, someone who does not compete with my strength but respects it. I want space in my schedule that is not constantly negotiated. Those are specifics, and specifics are uncomfortable because they narrow the field. If I say I want a partner who values quiet evenings and meaningful conversation, though I must also accept that I am not looking for adrenaline or chaos. That eliminates certain dynamics I may have unconsciously gravitated toward before. If I say I want to transition out of full-time corporate leadership within 3 years, I must also accept that I need a financial plan, a savings buffer, a strategy. I cannot hide behind someday. Specificity demands alignment between imagination and behavior. There is also something deeply revealing about writing from the perspective of my future self. One night, I wrote a letter, as if it were dated 5 years ahead. I described waking up in a smaller home with large windows. I described walking to a local coffee shop, greeting familiar faces. I described work that felt self-directed rather than imposed. It was not glamorous. It was not a fantasy of reinvention. It was grounded and detailed. When I reread it, I did not feel intimidated. I felt clarified. Clarity is different from motivation. Motivation is emotional and fleeting. Clarity is structural. It gives direction. Many of us were raised to be adaptable, to prioritize family, stability, responsibility. We learned how to respond to what life required. We became skilled at managing circumstances. But being responsive is not the same as being intentional. If I do not define what I want, life will continue to define it for me. There is also fear embedded in specificity. Once I articulate exactly what I want, I risk discovering that I may not be willing to do what it takes to create it, or worse, I risk trying and not achieving it. Vagueness keeps the dream protected from evaluation, but it also keeps it from materializing. I think about how easily I can outline quarterly goals for a company, metrics, timelines, benchmarks. I understand strategic planning in a professional context, yet when it comes to my own life, I used to default to sentiment instead of structure. That was not humility, it was avoidance. When I am specific, I am accountable. Accountable not in a harsh, punishing way, but in a grown way. If I want to reduce my corporate hours, I need to know what number in my savings account makes that feasible. If I want a partner who communicates directly, I need to examine whether I do the same. If I want to relocate eventually, I need to research neighborhoods, cost of living, social ecosystems. Specificity grounds desire in reality. And reality, contrary to what I once believed, does not diminish dreams. It refines them. There is also relief in knowing what I do not want. I no longer want to be constantly exhausted to prove my worth. I no longer want relationships that require me to shrink or overfunction. I no longer want a calendar so full that I forget what a slow afternoon feels like. Naming what I do not want sharpens what I do. And getting specific is not about controlling every outcome. It is about choosing direction. If I stay vague, I stay stuck in possibility. If I get specific, I create movement, not dramatic movement, not overnight transformation, but intentional steps towards something defined. And at this stage of my life, definition feels powerful, not because it guarantees results, but because it honors the fact that my desires deserve detail. Affirmations. Without lying to myself, there was a time when affirmations made me uncomfortable. Standing in front of a mirror declaring something that felt untrue did not empower me. It made me feel like I was pretending. If I looked at myself and said, "I am wildly successful," while quietly questioning my alignment, my body rejected the sentence. It felt inflated. My nervous system does not respond well to exaggeration. I have learned that at this stage of my life, I do not need hype, and I need honesty that moves. The problem was never affirmation itself. The problem was the distance between the words and what I could genuinely believe. If language stretches too far beyond my internal reality, it creates friction. And friction does not create confidence. It creates resistance. So I stopped trying to convince myself of outcomes I had not yet embodied. Instead, I began to speak to the version of me that is in progress. Instead of saying, "I am completely fearless," I say, I am learning to stay steady in uncertainty." Instead of, "I am financially limitless," I say, "I am building financial freedom deliberately." Instead of, "I attract perfect love effortlessly," I say, "I am becoming a woman who chooses calm, secure love." There is power in bridging language. It respects who I am today while gently orienting me toward who I am becoming. When I walk in the evenings, I sometimes record voice notes to myself. Nothing dramatic, just reflections. I listen to the tone of my own voice. I notice whether I sound harsh, tired, rushed. The way I speak to myself has often mirrored the way I have pushed myself. Efficient, demanding, outcome-focused. But transformation at this age does not respond to pressure. It responds to safety. Affirmations, when grounded, are not about tricking the mind. They are about training attention. If I repeatedly tell myself that I am incapable, behind, or too late, my behavior will align with that story. And if I repeatedly remind myself that I am capable of evolving, that my experience has value, that I am allowed to pivot, my behavior begins to shift in that direction. It is subtle, not cinematic. There is also something intimate about looking at myself without critique. When I stand in front of the mirror now, I do not focus on correcting flaws. I notice lines that were not there 10 years ago. I notice strength in my shoulders. I notice resilience in my eyes. I say things like, "You have handled more than you admit," or "You are allowed to want a softer life." These are not affirmations of grandeur. They are affirmations of permission. Midlife requires a different tone of self-talk. At 25, confidence might have come from bold declarations. At 45 or 50, it comes from integration. I am not trying to erase the parts of myself that feel uncertain. I am trying to include them without letting them dominate the narrative. And there is research showing that the brain does not fully distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. That fascinates me. Not because it means I can fantasize my way into success, but because it suggests that repetition shapes perception. If I consistently repeat to myself that I am stuck, I reinforce that identity. If I consistently repeat that I am evolving, even slowly, I begin to see evidence of that evolution. Affirmations, for me now, are less about declaring outcomes and more about reinforcing direction. When I think about eventually shifting my career structure, I do not tell myself, "You have already escaped." I tell myself, "You are capable of designing your next chapter responsibly." That sentence feels stable. It feels adult. When I think about the kind of partnership I want, I do not insist that it is guaranteed. I remind myself, "You no longer entertain chaos. That is within my control. That is grounded." And I also pay attention to what I eliminate. I no longer joke about being unlucky in love. I no longer casually say I am terrible with money. I no longer describe myself as exhausted as if it is a permanent trait. Language reinforces identity. The words I choose become architecture. There are nights when doubt still visits, when I question whether change is realistic. On those nights, affirmations are not loud declarations. They are quiet anchors. Sigh, I am not behind. I am allowed to recalibrate. I have time to choose carefully. These sentences settle me. They do not inflate me. They stabilize me. I think many women in this middle season dismiss affirmations because they associate them with superficial positivity. But there is a mature version of affirmation that is rooted in self-respect. It does not deny complexity. It acknowledges it and still chooses direction. I am not lying to myself anymore. I am speaking to myself with precision. And over time, that precision has shifted the way I show up, not dramatically, but consistently. And consistency at this stage of life is more powerful than intensity. Clean the room before you redesign your life. Before I redesign anything about my life, I have learned that I need to clean the room I am already standing in. Not just the physical room, although that matters more than I once admitted. I mean the invisible room, the one made of habits, conversations, notifications, obligations, and unspoken resentments. For years, I tried to imagine a different future, while surrounded by the same inputs that shaped my present. I would journal about change at night and then wake up to the same cluttered schedule, the same digital noise, the same draining interactions. I was trying to build something new on top of something that had never been cleared. It does not work that way. When I say clean the room, I mean I take inventory without drama. And I look at my calendar and ask which commitments feel aligned and which feel inherited. I scroll through my phone and notice which conversations leave me feeling expanded and which leave me subtly contracted. Energy is a quiet indicator. My body registers what my mind tries to rationalize. There are friendships that are not toxic, just outdated. The rhythm is off. The conversations circle the same complaints. I leave the lunch feeling heavier than when I arrived. In the past, I would have labeled that feeling as selfishness. Who am I to outgrow someone? Who am I to change pace when we have history? But history is not the same as compatibility. Cleaning the room sometimes looks like letting interactions taper without confrontation. It means not automatically saying yes to every invitation out of habit. It means accepting that not every connection is meant to accompany me into the next chapter. There is loneliness in that, but there is also clarity. And I also began a 30-day audit of my inputs. I did not announce it. I simply observed. What do I watch at night when I am tired? What do I read in the morning before my coffee has settled? Whose opinions shape my mood before 9 a.m.? I noticed how easily I absorbed other people's urgency. Headlines designed to agitate, commentary designed to provoke, images designed to compare. My nervous system was constantly reacting. No wonder I felt suspended in the middle, and I was rarely still long enough to hear my own direction. So I started removing what did not serve the life I described in my 5-year letter. I unfollowed accounts that triggered comparison, not because those women were doing anything wrong, but because my reaction to them was telling. I reduced news consumption to specific windows instead of constant scrolling. I stopped listening to podcasts that left me feeling inadequate. This was not about isolation. It was about discernment. If I am trying to build a calmer, more intentional life, then my daily environment has to reflect that intention. The physical space matters too. There was a drawer in my bedroom filled with old paperwork, outdated manuals, and random objects I had not touched in years. One Saturday morning, I emptied it onto the floor. Most of it was irrelevant. Old warranties, expired coupons, instruction booklets for devices I no longer own. And I realized how much I had been holding on to, simply because I had not paused to evaluate it. The drawer became a metaphor. How much in my emotional life is stored out of inertia rather than intention? Cleaning the room also means looking at self-talk patterns. The way I casually overcommit, the way I default to being the problem solver, the way I fill silence with productivity. These habits built the life I currently have. They are not inherently wrong, but if I want something different, and some of them cannot come with me unchanged. There is a subtle discomfort in creating empty space. When I decline an invitation that would have filled a Friday night, the silence that follows can feel unsettling. When I resist checking my phone every few minutes, the stillness can feel exposed. But in that exposure, I start to hear myself more clearly. I begin to notice what I am actually craving instead of what I have been reflexively doing. Cleaning the room is not glamorous work, and it does not produce immediate transformation. No one congratulates me for deleting apps or saying no to brunch, but every time I remove something misaligned, I feel a slight shift in my posture, a quiet reclaiming of space. If I want to eventually restructure my career, relocate, or deepen a partnership, those changes cannot be layered on top of chronic distraction and outdated dynamics. They require room, and room does not appear on its own. It is created, and I am learning that before I redesign my life, I must respect it enough to clear what no longer fits, not violently, not dramatically, deliberately, because the future I am envisioning will not survive in a space cluttered by habits that belong to an older version of me. Cleaning the room is not about perfection. It is about readiness, and readiness at this stage is quiet and intentional. It looks like less noise. It feels like breath. What I consume is who I become. A few years ago, when I was sitting in a quiet coffee shop in Seattle, Washington, across from a man who had known me long enough to speak without cushioning his words. He wasn't a therapist. He wasn't a life coach. He was simply someone who had watched me talk about change for years. He stirred his coffee slowly and asked me a question that unsettled me more than I expected. "What are you feeding your mind every day?" I almost laughed. I assumed he meant books, podcasts, professional development. Instead, Annie clarified, "What do you watch at night when you're tired? What conversations do you replay? What narratives are you absorbing without noticing?" I listed a few shows, easy ones, background noise, something to take the edge off after long workdays. I mentioned scrolling before bed, casual commentary, nothing extreme. He nodded and then asked, "Does any of that resemble the life you say you want?" The question lingered between us. It wasn't judgmental. It was precise. I'd been speaking for months about wanting more depth, more intentionality, a different professional structure, a calmer relationship dynamic someday. Yet the content I consumed daily was reactive, loud, distracting. My inputs did not match my aspirations. I left that coffee shop unsettled in a way that felt necessary. What I consume is not neutral. It is formative. I used to think of consumption as passive, something that happened around me, entertainment to fill space, and information to stay informed. But content shapes cognition. Repetition builds identity. If I spend hours watching relationships built on chaos and drama, I normalize volatility. If I consume commentary that constantly criticizes, compares, and polarizes, my thinking sharpens in those directions. If I scroll through curated lives without context, I absorb subtle dissatisfaction. I cannot tell my nervous system that I want calm while flooding it with stimulation. In the months after that conversation, I began paying closer attention to what I allowed into my mental space, not in a restrictive way, not with moral superiority, just with awareness. At night, instead of defaulting to whatever algorithm suggested, I asked myself a quiet question. Does this move me toward the woman I am becoming, or does it keep me in patterns I am trying to outgrow? Sometimes the answer surprised me. There were shows I once loved that now felt hollow, not because they were objectively bad, but because they reflected a version of me who needed distraction more than depth. There were podcasts I had outgrown, conversations centered on hustle, dominance, constant reinvention. That energy once motivated me. Now it exhausted me. The woman I am becoming values steadiness, nuance, long-form thought. So I started choosing differently. I began reading books that stretched my thinking instead of numbing it. Essays about midlife transitions, conversations about attachment, autonomy, financial independence, aging with intention. I listened to interviews with women who recalibrated at 50 without spectacle. I noticed how my internal dialogue shifted. When I consume thoughtful material, I think more thoughtfully. When I consume reactionary content, I become more reactive. This is not about becoming hyper-optimized. It is about congruence. If I say I want a partnership built on emotional maturity, but I constantly entertain narratives that glorify chaos, I create cognitive dissonance. If I say I want a career pivot grounded in strategy, but I spend hours numbing out instead of learning, I dilute my own intention. What I consume becomes rehearsal. There is also the matter of conversations. The people I speak to most frequently influence my emotional baseline. If I spend time with individuals who are perpetually dissatisfied, constantly criticizing, or trapped in cycles of blame, that tone seeps into me. I do not absorb it consciously, but it colors my perspective. I began noticing how I felt after certain interactions, energized, inspired, calm, or drained, agitated, slightly diminished. Those feelings became data. I am not responsible for fixing everyone's worldview, but I am responsible for curating my proximity. In Seattle, Washington, that conversation was brief, but its impact was lasting, and it forced me to see that I cannot casually consume negativity and expect to cultivate clarity. The brain adapts to what it repeatedly encounters. If it encounters noise, it learns noise. If it encounters reflection, it learns reflection. I also started paying attention to the stories I revisit in my own mind. Old grievances, past disappointments, imagined worst-case scenarios. Those are forms of consumption too. If I mentally replay rejection, I reinforce fear. If I mentally rehearse resilience, I reinforce steadiness. The media I ingest matters. The thoughts I rehearse matter. The environments I sit in matter. When I think about the life I described in my 5-year letter, it is not a life of constant stimulation. It is a life of intentional input. Conversations that are layered. Work that is focused. Evenings that are not hijacked by mindless noise. I am not eliminating entertainment. I am refining it. There is room for laughter, for lightness, for comfort shows. But there is also a conscious decision not to let those things dominate my mental landscape. Midlife is not about becoming rigid. It is about becoming selective. Selective with time. Selective with attention. Selective with energy. What I consume today shapes who I am tomorrow. That is not dramatic. It is neurological. And if I am serious about becoming a woman who lives with alignment instead of autopilot, then I cannot ignore what I am feeding my mind. The coffee shop conversation did not change my life overnight. It changed my awareness. Awareness changed my choices. And my choices, repeated quietly over months, began to shape a different internal climate, one that feels less scattered, more deliberate, more like me. Abundance isn't loud. For most of my life, abundance looked loud. It looked like promotions announced publicly, larger homes, new cars, big milestones framed in celebratory posts. Abundance looked like acceleration, more, faster, higher. And for a while, I chased that version. I believed that if I kept expanding outward, I would eventually feel expanded inward. But somewhere along the way, I realized that the loudest versions of abundance were often the least peaceful. At this stage of my life, abundance has changed shape. It is quieter. It looks like options. The option to leave a room when the conversation turns draining. The option to say no to a project that pays well but costs too much energy. And the option to take a weekend alone without asking permission. Abundance, for me now, is not accumulation. It is breathing room. There was a time when I believed scarcity meant not having enough money, and while financial insecurity is real and serious, I have come to understand that scarcity also lives in the nervous system. It is the belief that if I slow down, everything will collapse. That if I choose differently, I will lose what I have built. That if I step away from what is familiar, and I will not find stability again. Scarcity whispers that there is not enough time, not enough love, not enough opportunity left at this age. I have heard that whisper. I have felt it when I compare my timeline to someone else's. When I see women reinventing themselves at 50 and wonder if I am too late. When I think about relocating someday and question whether building new connections is realistic. But the more I observe women in this middle season, and the more I see that abundance does not need to announce itself. It shows up in subtle recalibrations. A woman quietly selling the large family home after her children move out, not because she has to, but because she wants less maintenance and more freedom. A woman renegotiating her work schedule to protect her health. A woman choosing companionship that feels calm over passion that feels chaotic. These choices are not flashy. They are deliberate. Abundance, I am learning, is the ability to choose alignment over appearance. It is waking up and not feeling dread. It is checking my bank account and knowing I am stable, even if I am not extravagant. It is having a handful of friendships that are honest rather than a wide circle that is performative. It is also internal. Abundance is emotional capacity, the ability to hold joy without anticipating disaster, the ability to receive kindness without deflecting it, the ability to rest without guilt. For years, I equated worth with productivity. If I was not pushing, building, achieving, I felt uneasy. That mentality produced results. It built a career, it built financial independence, but it also wired my system to equate motion with safety. Now, abundance feels like the freedom to slow down without panicking. It feels like trust, not blind optimism, but earned stability. When I consider eventually reshaping my career, abundance is not the fantasy of doubling my income. It is the possibility of structuring work around my life instead of structuring my life around work. When I consider partnership, abundance is not the fantasy of grand gestures. It is mutual steadiness, shared responsibility, emotional regulation. These things do not trend online. They do not generate applause, but they generate peace. There is also a generational layer to this. Many of us were raised with quiet messages about scarcity. Save everything. Don't risk too much. Be grateful for what you get. Stability over fulfillment. Those lessons were protective. They were shaped by different economic realities, different cultural pressures. But if I unconsciously carry inherited scarcity into a life that is already stable, I limit myself unnecessarily. Abundance asks me to examine which fears are current and which are echoes. It asks me to notice that opportunity still exists, that cities like Charleston, South Carolina are still there if I choose to explore them, that consulting opportunities still exist if I decide to pivot, that love still exists beyond past disappointments. Abundance is not naive belief that everything will be easy. It is the recognition that resources, internal and external, are available. It is the understanding that at this age I bring experience, discernment, resilience. Those are forms of wealth. I may not be at the beginning of my life, but I am not at the end either. There is room to adjust, room to refine, room to expand inward instead of outward. Abundance is not loud because it does not need validation. It is quiet confidence in my ability to navigate change thoughtfully. It is knowing that I am not trapped, even if I have been comfortable. It is understanding that the middle is not a limitation. It is a platform. And from a stable platform, expansion does not require spectacle. It requires intention. And that kind of abundance feels sustainable. It feels grown, when it feels like something I can actually hold. Belief without action is fantasy. Belief is comforting. Action is exposing. I can sit on my couch and imagine a different life with surprising clarity. I can see myself restructuring my career, consulting independently, perhaps eventually living somewhere softer like Charleston, South Carolina. I can picture a partnership that feels steady, evenings that are not rushed, a calendar that reflects intention instead of obligation. Imagination is fluid. It asks nothing of me in the moment, but the second belief demands action. Everything changes, because action creates evidence, and evidence can either confirm my capacity or confront my excuses. There is a version of manifestation that feels soothing precisely because it avoids logistics. It allows me to dwell in possibility without confronting math, timing, discipline, or trade-offs. But at this stage of my life, I cannot afford fantasy disguised as faith. If I say I want to reduce my corporate workload within 3 years, then I need numbers. I need to know exactly how much I spend each month. I need to calculate what a 6-month safety net looks like. I need to examine my retirement accounts, my investments, my risk tolerance. Spreadsheets are not glamorous. They are grounding. I have spent evenings reviewing statements instead of scrolling, not because it is thrilling, but because clarity is empowering in a quiet way. And belief without structure is fragile. It collapses under pressure. Structure gives belief weight. The same applies to health. If I say I want longevity, energy, mobility as I age, belief alone will not carry me there. I need to move my body consistently. I need to schedule appointments I would rather postpone. I need to sleep instead of staying up out of habit. At 25, I could rely on momentum. At 45 or 50, I rely on intention. There is also emotional action. If I say I want a different kind of relationship, I cannot simply wait for it to appear. I have to examine how I communicate. I have to resist engaging in dynamics that contradict what I claim to want. I have to tolerate periods of solitude instead of settling out of restlessness. Action often looks like restraint. It looks like declining an invitation that would entangle me in something misaligned. It looks like having uncomfortable conversations instead of avoiding them. It looks like saying, "This no longer works for me," without hostility. Belief alone keeps me comfortable. Action challenges my self-concept. I've always been competent, responsible, strategic in professional contexts. Yet I realized there was a part of my personal life where I preferred dreaming over planning. Planning makes things real. When I wrote my 5-year letter, it felt inspiring. When I sat down to map out what steps would move me toward that life, it felt intimidating. If I want autonomy, then I need skill diversification. If I want consulting work, I need to cultivate networks, update credentials, refine messaging. If I want geographic flexibility someday, I need to research cost of living differences, tax implications, community dynamics. These are not romantic tasks, but they are mature ones. Manifesting at this stage does not look like wishful thinking. It looks like responsible experimentation. It looks like taking one course that expands my expertise. It looks like setting aside a specific percentage of income for transition rather than vaguely hoping savings accumulate. It looks like testing a side project before burning bridges. There is humility in action. It forces me to admit what I do not yet know. It forces me to start before I feel entirely ready. Belief can stay abstract. Action requires contact with reality. And reality is not the enemy of dreams. It is the terrain they must navigate. And I also notice how often I used to wait for clarity before acting. I wanted certainty, a guarantee that the pivot would work, a sign that timing was perfect. But certainty rarely precedes movement. It follows it. When I take a small, deliberate step, I gather information. When I gather information, my confidence becomes evidence-based instead of speculative. That shift matters, because midlife reinvention, if it happens, is not reckless. It is calculated. It is paced. When it is built on accumulated experience, I do not need to dismantle my life overnight to prove courage. I need to move in alignment with my stated desires. If I say I want calm, my schedule should reflect fewer unnecessary obligations. If I say I want financial flexibility, my spending should reflect long-term strategy. If I say I want emotional stability, my boundaries should reflect it. Action is the bridge between intention and identity. Without it, unbelief becomes a pleasant narrative I tell myself while nothing changes. With it, belief becomes architecture. I am not interested in dramatic leaps. I am interested in integrity. Integrity between what I say I want and what I consistently do. That kind of alignment is not loud, but it is powerful. And it is the only kind of manifestation that endures beyond imagination. Ask for signs, but also listen. There are moments when logic reaches its limit. I can make spreadsheets, and I can calculate savings. I can analyze pros and cons of relocating to Charleston, South Carolina, or restructuring my career. I can list compatibility traits in a potential partner. I can do all the rational work, and still, something remains unsettled. That is usually when I ask for a sign, not in a theatrical way, not as a demand for something dramatic to fall from the sky. More like a quiet conversation with whatever intelligence governs timing and consequence. And there was a night when I sat alone at my kitchen table thinking about Chicago, Illinois. I had been considering a possible opportunity there, not a permanent move, but a shift, a temporary contract that could open doors I hadn't previously explored. On paper, it made sense. The compensation was strong. The city is vibrant. Lake Michigan in winter has a certain stark beauty that has always pulled at me. But I felt hesitation. It wasn't fear exactly. It was ambiguity. So I did something simple, and I closed my laptop and said quietly, if this path is aligned for me, let me feel clarity. If it isn't, let me feel peace about releasing it. I did not specify a billboard or a coincidence. I asked for internal confirmation. In the past, I might have looked for something cinematic, a stranger mentioning Chicago, a random email referencing the city, something unmistakable, but maturity has changed what I consider a sign. The next morning, I went for a walk before checking my phone. The air was cool. The neighborhood was quiet. As I imagined myself in Chicago, the colder winters, the different rhythm, the professional demands, I noticed tension in my chest. Not excitement, not expansion, constriction. Then I imagined myself declining the offer and staying the course I had been carefully restructuring. I imagined slower, steadier shifts, consulting work developing gradually, geographic flexibility that was intentional, not reactive. My body softened, and that softness was the sign. It would have been easy to override it, to tell myself I was being cautious, to frame the tension as growth. But there is a difference between growth and misalignment. Learning to distinguish between the two is a quiet skill. Asking for signs for me now is less about external validation and more about internal listening. There is wisdom in my nervous system that my ambition sometimes tries to outrun. When I ask for guidance, I'm really asking for access to clarity that already exists beneath noise. Sometimes signs come through conversation, a friend mentioning something casually that lands with weight, an article that appears at the right moment, a memory resurfacing unexpectedly. But the most reliable signal is peace, not excitement, not adrenaline. Peace. Peace does not rush. It does not demand urgency. It feels grounded, even if the path is challenging. And there have also been times when I asked for a sign about a person, about whether to continue investing emotionally or step back. In those moments, I noticed that when I imagined a future with them, my body felt unsettled, hyper-alert, slightly braced. When I imagined releasing the connection, even though it felt disappointing, there was relief. Relief is information. I used to ignore it because it did not align with what I wanted to be true. Now, I treat it as data. There is a danger in outsourcing responsibility entirely to signs, in waiting passively for something unmistakable to appear. I do not believe in abandoning discernment in favor of mysticism, but I also do not believe in forcing outcomes through pure logic. There is a middle ground. I ask, I observe, I listen, and then I decide. The act of asking for a sign is not about surrendering agency. It is about quieting the external noise long enough to hear internal alignment. In this season of life, and I trust subtlety more than spectacle, if a path requires constant convincing, it is rarely right for me. If it requires me to override my body repeatedly, it is not sustainable. Guidance rarely shouts, it whispers. It shows up as a sentence that lingers longer than it should, a calm that settles unexpectedly, a discomfort that refuses to dissipate. When I honor those signals, my decisions feel less frantic, more integrated. There is humility in admitting that I do not always know, that despite my experience and independence, I still seek confirmation beyond my own reasoning. But there is strength in listening. Asking for signs for me is an act of respect. Respect for timing. Respect for intuition. Respect for the reality that not every opportunity is meant to be seized. simply because it exists. Sometimes the sign is forward motion. Sometimes the sign is restraint. And learning the difference is part of becoming the woman who does not chase every open door. She but walks through the ones that feel right when she steps inside. Desperation has a scent. Desperation is rarely visible. It does not announce itself. It does not introduce itself as panic. It often disguises itself as enthusiasm, persistence, effort. But it has a scent. I have felt it on myself before. Not the obvious kind that calls 10 times in a row, the quieter version, the one that checks the phone too often, the one that over-explains, and the one that leans forward just a little too much in conversation, hoping to secure something that should unfold naturally. At this stage of my life, dating is not casual. It carries context, history, lessons learned the hard way. There is an awareness that time is not infinite, at least not in the way it felt at 25. That awareness can morph into urgency. And urgency, if I am not careful, becomes desperation. Desperation is not about wanting love. Wanting love is human. It is about believing that without this particular person, this particular opportunity, I will miss my only chance. It is scarcity, wearing perfume. I remember a period when I met someone who seemed aligned, intelligent, stable, attentive. The early conversations were promising, and I could feel myself subtly accelerating, imagining futures too quickly, assigning meaning to small gestures. Nothing dramatic, just internal speed. When he took longer to respond one day, I noticed a shift in my body, on tightness, story-making, a quiet narrative that said, "Don't lose this." That narrative was not about him. It was about fear. Fear that good connections are rare. Fear that starting over again would be exhausting. Fear that maybe this was my window. That fear created pressure, and pressure changes energy. Even if I did not say anything overtly anxious, the energy was there. The slight over-accommodation, the slight self-editing, the subtle monitoring of his tone. And desperation does not attract stability. It unsettles it. The irony is that the more I tried to secure the connection internally, the more disconnected I felt from myself. It took restraint to step back, to slow down my projections, to return to my own center instead of orbiting someone else's attention. There is a maturity in recognizing when I am leaning too far forward. It is not about pretending I do not care. It is about trusting that what is meant to develop does not require gripping. Attachment theory explains some of this. When I feel secure, I move through relationships with steadiness. When old fears are activated, I move toward reassurance seeking, understanding that pattern has been sobering. If I want a calm partnership, I must embody calm energy. That does not mean suppressing desire. It means regulating it. It means allowing space between interactions without filling it with catastrophic thinking. It means letting silence exist without assigning it meaning. And it means observing whether a connection grows naturally instead of forcing momentum. Desperation is not limited to romance. It appears in career decisions too, accepting an opportunity too quickly because I am afraid nothing better will appear, saying yes to a project that drains me because I fear income instability, even when my finances are stable. It shows up when I overcommit to prove value, when I negotiate from anxiety instead of confidence. Desperation carries a subtle message. I do not trust that there is enough love, enough opportunity, enough time. But every time I have relaxed my grip, not withdrawn, just relaxed, something shifts. When I stop chasing responses, I receive clearer communication. When I stop overextending professionally, I see which opportunities respect my boundaries. When I stop trying to secure outcomes prematurely, I regain self-respect. There is something powerful about leaning back, not in apathy, not in indifference, in groundedness. At 50, being alone for a stretch of time feels different than it did at 25. It can feel heavier, more reflective, sometimes lonely. But loneliness is not the same as desperation. Loneliness invites introspection. Desperation demands relief. When I can sit with loneliness without rushing to eliminate it, I strengthen something inside myself. I become less reactive, less willing to accept misalignment just to avoid discomfort. And there is a subtle glow that comes from not needing, from wanting, but not clinging. That glow is magnetic in a way that urgency never is. It communicates, I am choosing, I am not grasping. And that shift from grasping to choosing changes everything. Desperation narrows vision. It fixates. Grounded desire expands it. It allows options. If I truly believe in abundance, then I cannot operate from panic. And I must trust that what aligns will not require me to abandon myself in the process of securing it. That trust is not passive. It is disciplined. It requires me to soothe my own fear instead of outsourcing that job to another person or opportunity. And when I do that, something settles. I no longer smell like urgency. I move like choice. And that difference is felt long before it is spoken. When I look back at the woman who began this journey, I do not see someone dramatic or reckless. I see someone steady, responsible, capable, a woman who built a life that works. I see a woman who wakes up on time, pays her bills, shows up to meetings prepared, answers messages, keeps promises. I see a woman who has survived heartbreak without collapsing, who has built financial stability without applause, who has learned how to sit alone without falling apart. From the outside, nothing is wrong. And yet, beneath the surface of competence, there has been a quiet question humming for years. Is this all? Not in a greedy way, not in a dissatisfied way, in a reflective way. Through this story, I have not burned my life down. I have not quit everything impulsively. I have not chased reinvention for the sake of spectacle. Instead, I have done something far less visible and far more demanding. I have examined. I examined the beliefs I carry about tomorrow and realized that I already live by faith every day. I examined my fear of success and understood that expansion can feel more threatening than failure. I examined what I am holding on to and released roles, identities, and attachments that no longer fit. I practiced gratitude not as performance, but as grounding. I forced myself to get specific about what I actually want, not what sounds impressive. I changed the way I speak to myself so that my internal voice reflects precision instead of pressure. I cleaned my environment, not just my home, but my inputs, my conversations, my digital space. I confronted the reality that what I consume shapes who I become. I redefined abundance as peace, choice, and stability rather than spectacle. I stopped pretending belief alone would move my life forward and began aligning my actions with my intentions. I asked for signs, but more importantly, I listened to the quiet signals inside my own body. I recognized desperation when it surfaced and learned to lean back instead of grasping. And none of these shifts were loud. They did not make headlines, but they changed the architecture of my life from the inside out. And here is the lesson that rises from all of it. Manifesting your dream life is not about becoming someone else. It is about removing what is misaligned so that who you already are can breathe. It is not about forcing outcomes. It is about aligning belief, behavior, environment, and emotional regulation so that your life begins to reflect your internal clarity. At this stage, in the middle, the transformation is subtle. It is not a before and after photo. It is a recalibration. The middle is where I stop blaming circumstances and start adjusting inputs. It is where I stop waiting for permission and start taking responsibility. It is where I stop dramatizing dissatisfaction and start refining direction. If you are watching this alone tonight, headphones on, house quiet, and you feel that quiet ache, I want you to know something important. And you are not failing. You are not behind. You are not ungrateful for wanting more depth, more alignment, more steadiness. You are simply aware, and awareness is the beginning of authorship. Here is how you apply this to your life right now, without theatrics. First, choose one area where you feel misaligned. Not your entire life, just one. Your schedule, your relationship patterns, your finances, your health. Write down what you actually want in detail. And then compare it honestly to your daily behavior. Second, audit your inputs for 7 days. Notice what you watch, who you speak to, what thoughts you rehearse. Do not judge, just observe. Awareness will show you what needs to shift. Third, practice leaning back instead of reaching forward, in conversations, in dating, in career negotiations. See what changes when you move from urgency to steadiness. Fourth, define abundance in your own terms, not culturally, not socially, personally. What does enough look like for you? You do not need to overhaul everything at once. The middle is not about explosions. It is about precision. There is profound dignity in refining your life quietly. And maybe the most powerful realization of all is this: you do not need to be rescued. You need to be aligned, not louder, not younger, not different, aligned. And because the woman who built the life you have now is capable of building the next version too, if she is willing to look honestly at what needs to shift. You're not broken. You're just in the middle. Before you leave, I want to ask you something simple. Right now, which feels more true for you? A, I am holding on to something that no longer fits. B, I am afraid to step into something bigger. Comment A or B below. I read them. And your answer might help another woman realize she is not alone in her season. And tell me, what part of this story felt closest to your own life? Where are you recalibrating right now? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can learn from each other. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. Your support allows me to keep creating space for women who are doing fine on the outside, but thinking deeply on the inside. We are not chasing hype here. We are building alignment, and I will see you in the next one.